All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to do something, well, incredibly ambitious. We're going to visualize the sweeping 1,000-year hourglass arc of the United States. We'll bridge America's deep colonial past, analyze the really tight geopolitical bottleneck of our current moment, and then forecast a radically transformed spacefaring future. So let's just dive right into this fascinating journey. To help wrap our heads around this timeline, we've broken the agenda down into 5 distinct eras. We'll kick things off with the first 5 centuries, move into the current geopolitical pivot, explore a reshaped American map, look at demographic contraction, and then end with the spacefaring future. Okay, let's jump straight into Section 1, the first 5 centuries. When you map it all out, the sheer velocity of American history is just wild. We go from 1526, where the continent is this vast tapestry of indigenous nations and rival European colonies, right up to 1776 with the birth of a unified republic. Then, through the massive rupture of the Civil War in 1861, the nation rapid fires into industrialization. By 1945, the U.S. had completely transformed into a global superpower, anchoring the entire post-World War II order. That era of relative peace and American dominance, that's what's often called Pax Americana. Now, if you're wondering why America became such a demographic powerhouse so fast, you really have to compare the early settlement models. New Spain was heavily focused on resource extraction, think mining and sugar, with strictly regulated Catholic immigration. But British North America, they took a completely different path. Their economy relied heavily on family farming, which absolutely required rapid population growth. By adopting highly liberal immigration policies that welcomed diverse European groups, they laid down the ultimate demographic foundation that would eventually power a continental empire. And all those rapidly growing populations, well, they needed space. This fueled the concept of manifest destiny. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some standard political policy. It was a deeply ingrained 19th century ideological belief that Americans literally had an inherent right, a destiny, to control the entire continent. That belief was the engine pushing the nation's borders relentlessly from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific Ocean, locking in the physical boundaries of the contiguous U.S. we know today. Which brings us right into Section 2. The current geopolitical pivot. This brings us into the tight center of our historical hourglass. The official U.S. national security strategy documents recently declared pretty starkly that the days of the United States propping up the entire world order like Atlas are over. That post-Cold War era of unipolar American dominance, it is officially ended. The U.S. is very clearly signaling to the world and to its allies that it's stepping back from being the global policeman. Experts actually call our current reality an interregnum. It's basically a really messy transitional gap between global orders. We are actively moving into a multipolar world where power is shared. The U.S. is pulling back from traditional multilateral alliances. Trade and tariffs, they're now frequently used as geopolitical weapons. And the American focus is shifting incredibly heavily towards securing its own borders and dominating the Western Hemisphere, rather than trying to micromanage conflicts across the globe. But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway from this section. While this phase of global tariffs and shifting alliances feels chaotic, we aren't just watching a breakdown. As foreign policy analysts point out, we're living through a system that is actively trying to reassemble and adapt itself. The world is just testing out new, multipolar rules. It's an uncomfortable adaptation, for sure, but a historically necessary one. Moving on to Section 3, a reshaped American map. Let's look at the physical map, starting with some near-term data. Over just the next 30 years, by 2050, federal agencies project the U.S. coastline will experience 10 to 12 inches of sea level rise. Actually, let me put that into perspective. That amount equals the total sea level rise measured over the entire previous century. The water is rising, and the rate of that rise is accelerating incredibly fast. Now, zoom out further down our 1,000-year timeline, and the data gets, well, staggering. If global emissions aren't curbed, the baked-in heat in our climate system, which drives thermal expansion and melts the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, could result in up to 50 feet of sea level rise by the year 2500. A 50-foot rise means the permanent submersion of low-lying states like Florida and Louisiana, plus severe erosion of the eastern and Gulf coasts. But it's not just a coastal problem. Inland, the historic agricultural core of the continent faces desertification, driven by changing climate zones and the total projected exhaustion of the Ogallala Aquifer. That's the massive underground water source currently feeding the Great Plains. The physical space that actually defines America is going to shrink dramatically. Next up is Section 4, Demographic Contraction and Change. Alongside a shrinking map, we are looking at an unprecedented demographic shift. Census Bureau data reveals a stark convergence. Driven by an aging baby boom generation and steadily declining fertility rates, the death rate in the U.S. is rising while the birth rate falls. Right around 2038, deaths are projected to permanently exceed births in the U.S. From that moment onward, immigration becomes literally the only driver of any potential population growth. And as the population ages, the demographic makeup of America will fundamentally change. By 2060, the non-Hispanic white population is projected to drop below 50%, falling to about 44.9%. At the same time, the Hispanic population will rise to nearly 27%. This reflects huge shifting cultural and demographic momentums within the country. Okay, now we're going to look deep into the future, and this data is truly mind-bending. Global forecasting models project a staggering demographic compression. The U.S. population might peak around 369 million late this century, but by the year 2300, models project the Northern American population could shrink down to a median of just over 300,000 individuals. And these will be highly aged populations, median age over 55, clustered in protected northern climate zones as the global population stabilizes and contracts. And that leads us to our final act, Section 5, the spacefaring future. So, with a retreating coastline and a collapsing terrestrial population, where does this all lead? To survive the heat and resource depletion of Earth, human industry basically has no choice but to expand outward. In the 2030s, we'll see permanent lunar research habitats extracting water and hydrogen. By the 2040s, automated commercial asteroid mining kicks in for raw materials. And looking past 2100, we'll see deep space orbital data centers, cooled by the natural vacuum of space, handling massive AI computational needs without dumping heat into the Earth's atmosphere. This is a real game changer. As economic value, resource extraction, and computational power migrate to orbit, the terrestrial nation-state as we know it will slowly become obsolete. Macro-historical projections suggest sovereign power will shift away from traditional geography-based governments. Instead, we're looking at decentralized coalitions, corporate municipal zones, and technocratic syndicates operating primarily out in space. Which brings us to the very end of our 1,000-year arc, the year 2526. By this time, human populations will likely reside primarily in orbital colonies, powered by planet-scale thermonuclear fusion grids. We'll be getting around using high-acceleration interplanetary ion transports. And with all the heavy industry and server farms moved to the vacuum of space, a depopulated Earth can effectively be preserved, managed as a protected ecological and historical reserve. Which leaves us with this final, really profound thought to consider. America began 500 years ago as a rush to colonize a physical continent. But as we lay the foundations for an interplanetary civilization today and face a future of retreating coastlines and orbital economies, what will the concept of a nation even mean a millennium from now? It's a fascinating question, and honestly, one we're already beginning to answer. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking forward.